It all started like any other day. I was sitting in my favorite cafe working on my laptop when she walked in. Her name was Anna. She had this quiet confidence about her, with a smile that felt like it could brighten even the gloomiest of days. We talked for a while, nothing serious, just small talk about the weather, the coffee, and how difficult it was to find a decent croissant in the city. But there was something about her, something that pulled me in, made me want to know more. She was beautiful, sure, but it was more than that. She had this sadness behind her eyes, like she was carrying a weight no one else could see. We exchanged numbers and started seeing each other. It wasn't long before I was falling for her. Hard. But as things got more serious, I started noticing strange things. At first, I thought I was just imagining it, but soon, there was no denying something was wrong. The first time I saw him, I didn't even know what I was looking at. I was at Anna's apartment, waiting for her to come back from the store. I was flipping through a magazine, trying to pass the time, when I caught something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow just at the edge of my vision. I turned my head, but nothing was there. But then it happened again. A shape, a figure standing just behind me, reflected in the mirror across the room. This time, I jumped up and spun around, my heart pounding. Still, no one was there. When Anna came home, I told her about it. She laughed it off, said I was probably just tired or stressed. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. It was a few weeks later when I saw him again. This time, there was no mistaking it. I had stayed over at Anna's place, and in the middle of the night, I woke up to the feeling of someone watching me. I opened my eyes, and there, standing at the foot of the bed, was an older man. His face was twisted in anger, his eyes burning with a hatred I couldn't understand. I froze, too terrified to move. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, glaring at me. Then, in a voice that was low and cold, he said, "Leave her, or I will make you regret it." I blinked, and he was gone. Anna was still asleep beside me. I woke her up, told her what had happened, but she just looked at me like I was crazy. She didn't see him. That's when I started to realize what was happening. The man I saw, it had to be her father. He was dead, I knew that much. Anna had told me he'd died when she was a teenager. But now he was haunting me, and he was going to do whatever it took to drive me away. I didn't leave. Couldn't. I loved Anna too much. But the haunting didn't stop. Every time I was alone, her father would appear. Sometimes it was just a fleeting glimpse, a shadow in the corner of my eye, a cold breeze when there shouldn't have been one. Other times, he would stand right in front of me, glaring, threatening. I tried to talk to Anna about it, but she never believed me. She thought I was just stressed, that maybe I was having nightmares. She didn't understand. I couldn't make her understand. The worst part was it wasn't just the visions. Things started happening. Doors would slam shut on their own. I would hear his voice, whispering threats in the middle of the night, telling me to leave her or face the consequences. But I wasn't going to leave. Couldn't. The night everything came to a head was the worst. Anna and I had gone out for dinner, and when we came back to her apartment, everything felt off. The air was heavy, thick with tension. I could feel him before I saw him. We were sitting on the couch, talking, when suddenly the lights flickered and went out. I heard a noise from the hallway. Anna didn't seem to notice anything. She kept talking, laughing about something that had happened at work. But I couldn't focus. Then, out of nowhere, Anna's voice changed. It was deeper, harsher, like someone else was speaking through her. She turned to me, her eyes dark, and said, "You need to leave. Now." I stood up, my heart racing. "Anna, what's going on?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me, her face blank, like she wasn't really there. And then, just as suddenly, she was back to normal. She blinked, smiled at me, completely unaware of what had just happened. That's when I knew. Her father wasn't just haunting me. He was trying to use her. He was trying to push me away, to make me leave her for good. I don't know how long I can keep this up. Every day the hauntings get worse. He's getting stronger, more aggressive. But I can't leave her. I won't. Anna still doesn't understand. She thinks it's all in my head, that I'm just imagining things. But I know the truth. Her father is trying to protect her, but he's wrong. I'm not like the others. I'm not going to leave her no matter what he does, even if it kills me. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the air was suffocating. It wasn't just the hauntings anymore. It was like the entire apartment was turning against me. Windows would slam shut with impossible force. Objects would move on their own. And sometimes, I'd feel cold hands grip my shoulders when no one was there. Every night, I'd lie awake, waiting for the next sign of his presence, knowing it was only a matter of time. Anna still didn't see it. She'd laugh, teasing me about spooky stories. Whenever I mentioned what was happening, she couldn't understand, and I was beginning to realize she never would. Whatever curse her father's spirit carried, it was meant for me and me alone. One night, after yet another argument about me imagining things, I couldn't take it anymore. I left the apartment, wandering the empty streets in the early hours of the morning, trying to clear my head. But even out there, I couldn't escape him. I caught reflections of his twisted face in every window I passed, heard his threats echoing in my ears over the howling wind. Leave her. You will suffer. When I returned to Anna's apartment, it was past midnight, and the building seemed quieter than usual. Too quiet. I found her sitting on the couch. The room was filled with a strange chill, and for a moment, I could see my breath in the air. Anna? I asked, but she didn't respond. I stepped closer, noticing how still she was, how unnaturally stiff. My stomach dropped. I knelt down in front of her and gently touched her shoulder. Her eyes snapped to mine, but they weren't her eyes. They were empty, lifeless, cold. The voice that came out of her mouth wasn't hers either. She's mine. You can't have her. It was him, speaking through her, using her as a puppet. I stumbled back, horrified. For the first time, I realized how deep this haunting went. He wasn't just angry. He wasn't just trying to drive me away. He was trying to take her from me completely. Suddenly, Anna collapsed, her body limp like a rag doll. I rushed to her side, shaking her, desperate to wake her up. Finally, her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me, confused and scared. What happened? She whispered, her voice shaky. I don't know, I muttered, brushing her hair away from her face. She didn't remember any of it. I didn't want to frighten her more than she already was, but deep down, I knew we couldn't go on like this. I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't keep watching her suffer, oblivious to the fact that her father's spirit was tearing her life apart. That night, I decided to confront him. I didn't know how or if it would even work, but I had to try. I waited until Anna fell asleep. The apartment was silent, save for the soft sound of her breathing. I didn't have to wait long. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and I felt that familiar presence, the oppressive weight of his hatred pressing down on me. I stood up, heart pounding, trying to steady my voice as I spoke into the empty room. I know you're here, I said, my voice shaking but determined. You can't keep doing this. You can't keep hurting her. First, there was no response. Then, from the shadows, he appeared, his ghostly figure materializing in the center of the room. His face was twisted with rage, his eyes burning with the same intensity I'd seen so many times before. She's mine. His voice echoed through the room, harsh and cold. "You're nothing. You'll leave, just like the rest." I stepped closer, my fear giving way to anger. "No, I'm not leaving. I love her, and you have to let her go." His eyes darkened, and for a moment, the air grew so cold that it hurt to breathe. But I didn't back down. "I'm not afraid of you," I lied. "You don't belong here anymore, and it's time you let her live her life. She's not yours to control." His face contorted with fury, and for a moment, I thought he was going to attack me. But then, something changed. His form flickered, growing weaker, like my words were driving him back. I felt a strange energy in the room, a shifting power dynamic. And then he was gone. The room warmed, the tension lifted, and I was left standing there, breathless and shaking. The next morning, things felt different. The air in the apartment wasn't heavy anymore. The strange noises and flickering lights had stopped. Anna noticed too. She seemed lighter, more at peace, though she couldn't explain why. "Maybe it was just a phase," she said with a smile, not knowing the full truth of what had happened. I didn't tell her everything, but I knew the worst was over. Her father was gone, or at least he was no longer strong enough to torment us. But deep down, I knew something else. I hadn't just fought for Anna. I had fought for myself, for our future. And now, as we moved forward, there was only one thing left to do: make sure he never came back. Weeks passed, and life with Anna felt almost normal again. We were closer than ever, and for the first time since I met her, I could picture a future without the constant fear of her father's ghost. But there was always a shadow in the back of my mind, a nagging doubt that he was truly gone. I would catch myself looking over my shoulder, flinching at every unexplained noise. Anna noticed, of course. She asked if I was okay, if I was still seeing things. I lied to her again, told her everything was fine, but I knew, deep down, that he was still out there, waiting, watching. Because something like that doesn't just disappear. Not forever. I had hoped it was over. Weeks had passed since that night when I confronted Anna's father, and life had settled into an almost peaceful rhythm. Anna and I were happier, closer, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that we had a future. One without shadows lurking in the corners. But peace, it seemed, was only an illusion. It started subtly. A cold breeze when the windows were closed. A creak of the floorboards in the dead of night when no one was walking. Little things that would have seemed innocent before, but now sent chills up my spine. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself that I was being paranoid. After everything we had been through, it was natural to feel a little jumpy. But then the real signs began. One night, I woke up to a familiar feeling. A weight in the room, heavy and oppressive, like the air had thickened around me. I blinked into the darkness, my heart pounding as I scanned the room. Anna was asleep beside me, her breathing soft and steady. His ghostly form, faint but unmistakable. His eyes locked on me with the same intensity as before, though this time there was no rage, only calm. It was more terrifying than his anger. I sat up, my throat dry, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you want?" He didn't respond. He just stood there watching. Then, slowly, he turned and vanished into the shadows. For the next few nights, it was the same. He didn't speak, didn't threaten. He just appeared silently, at the foot of the bed, or in the doorway watching. I didn't tell Anna. Couldn't. She seemed so happy, so free from the burden of her father's ghost, and I didn't want to ruin that. But deep down I knew he wasn't finished with me. One evening, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, waiting for Anna to come home from work, the feeling of cold washed over me again. I knew what was coming. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. and I could feel his presence behind me before I even turned around. I swallowed hard, refusing to let fear control me. I had faced him once before, and I wouldn't run now. But this time there was something different. As I stood to leave the room, I heard a sound, faint but unmistakable. The soft, almost imperceptible scratch of pencil on paper. I turned slowly, my heart racing, and saw a piece of paper on the counter. It hadn't been there a moment ago, I was sure of it. And on the paper, written in rough, jagged letters, were words that made my blood run cold. You passed the test. My hand shook as I picked up the note. The pencil was still lying next to it, as if placed there intentionally. For a long moment, I just stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. A test? What test? Was this some kind of twisted game he had been playing all along? And then, beneath the first line, there was more. A final warning. But remember, if you ever hurt her, I will come back. I dropped the paper, my mind racing. It all became clear. The hauntings, the terror, the constant threats, they had been a test. He wasn't just trying to scare me away. He was testing my loyalty, my love for Anna. He wanted to know if I would stay, if I could endure his wrath without abandoning her like the others had. I had passed. But at what cost? Anna came home later that evening, completely unaware of what had happened. I didn't tell her about the note or the ghostly visits that had returned. She had been through enough, and I didn't want to burden her with the knowledge that her father's spirit was still watching, still judging. But I couldn't forget the message. Every day, it was in the back of my mind, a constant reminder that I was being watched. The haunting had stopped again after that night, but I knew better now than to believe it was over. He was still out there, somewhere waiting for me to make a mistake. One wrong move, one moment of weakness, and he would be back. His warning was clear. If I ever betrayed her trust or caused her pain, he would return. And next time, I wasn't sure I would survive his wrath. I loved Anna, but the weight of that warning, the knowledge that her father's ghost was always there, always watching, was something I couldn't escape. It hung over me like a dark cloud, a constant, unspoken threat that I had to carry alone. Life with Anna returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. We moved forward, making plans for the future, talking about getting a new place, maybe even starting a family. But no matter how happy we were, that note was always in the back of my mind, a shadow that lingered. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake up and stare at the spot where her father had once stood, half expecting him to appear again. But he never did. Not physically, at least. Yet I could feel him. He was still out there, still watching from wherever he lingered, waiting for a reason to come back. And I had no choice but to live with that. To live with the knowledge that I was being judged, even in death. That any misstep could bring him back, angrier and more dangerous than before. For now, though, I had passed his test. But his warning echoed in my mind, a constant reminder. If you hurt her, I will come back. I couldn't, because I knew that if he ever returned, there would be no second chances.